Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. I'm Rick Husey, and today the topic is a prediction by John Chapman, who is a pioneer in broadband, specifically in the DOCSIS environment. And he's saying that by the year 2040, we should be able to order, I guess, as consumers, a 1 terabit per second connection. Be right back with more. Hey there, Rick Husey with Quorum with Broadband Deployment News. So I found this interesting. This is in light reading, and it was at the Cable Next Gen conference, which just occurred recently in Denver. So again, this is John Chapman. He was with Cisco for 30 plus years. Started there in the 90s. I think it was the early 90s, and really has done some phenomenal things. So he's one of the people that helped develop DOCSIS all the way from the first DOCSIS standard up through what we're talking about now with DOCSIS 4.0 and full duplex and its extended spectrum DOCSIS. He's been in this business a long time, was with Cisco a long time, was recently laid off, oddly enough, in their most recent layoff back, I think, in February. But he was at the Cable Next Gen show and was, again, kind of predicting some of the things that we might be seeing as far as broadband speeds here in the future. You see here, broadband access networks on path to 1 terabit speeds by 2040, citing his 3 laws of broadband, which we'll take a look at here. DOCSIS pioneer and longtime Cisco exec John Chapman asserts that internet speeds increase 1,000 times every 20 years. Fiber is the future, but DOCSIS still has a long life ahead, he predicts. And we'll see why he believes that here. If past trends hold up, the broadband access network is poised to deliver speeds of 1 terabit per second by 2040, and that's just a little over 15 years from now. So that's pretty remarkable as we think about that. DOCSIS pioneer and longtime Cisco systems exec John Chapman predicted here during a keynote, and that would be at the Cable Next Gen, focus on the future of broadband. That forecast takes its cue in part from the evolution of Moore's law, which sees chip density increase by 2 every 2 years. That's something that was been a prediction for a long time, is pretty much held as the prediction. It's held true. So as processors have gotten faster and faster, it's kind of held that Moore's law has been pretty much upheld. The rate of performance for technologies such as Ethernet and DOCSIS, which have been rising up by a factor of 10 about every 7 years, and the pace of optics advancements. So these are all things that would play into this. So that prediction also ties into what Chapman calls his 3 laws of broadband, which was presented, I guess, at the conference for the first time. Internet speeds increase 1,000 times every 20 years. Core technology leads access technology by 20 years. So core technology, I think they're talking there about just the overall backbone of the internet, kind of core routers of the internet and the core connections obviously have to be much faster than the access that you and I would get just as consumers. And then in a competitive market, access speeds is supply side driven, not demand side driven. And the point there is that if you've got various competitors in the market, they are going to be pushing to up the speeds that they can provide. And it's not necessarily driven by demand. So do consumers need 10 gig and 25 gig that we've seen some providers offering? Do they even need 1 gig? But that is a advantage that fiber has over cable right now. So that is going to be what is marketed, and that is going to be what is kind of driving the demand from the supply side, not from the consumer side. Chapman said these observations are backed by studying 10 different businesses and technology trends, investment based on a sustainable market, the density and costs of ASICs, that's a application-specific integrated circuit. And he developed the first ASIC at Cisco way back when, so he knows that. And SerDes, serial deserializer, optics, advanced modulation and digital signal processing techniques, the advancement of RF technology, the evolution and availability of fiber, and the emergence of a common IP and segment routing infrastructure. In today's 20-year cycle, he explained broadband technology is currently in a 7-year 1 gig to 10 gig window, meaning an operator must offer speeds of 1 gig to be considered a serious broadband provider, but doesn't yet have to make the leap to 10 gig speeds. And that does depend on the competitiveness of the market. If you have a cable operator in a market and they are the only provider there, they don't necessarily need a gig to be taken seriously, because if they're providing something under a gig, but still more than sufficient for what the consumers need, then there's generally not an issue. However, if you are, at this point, we're at a point now where if you're a DSL provider and you're maybe providing 10 by 1 wherever you are, you're not taken seriously, because that is at a point where consumers can't really do what they want to do. But yeah, if you're in a competitive market right now, people kind of expect you to be able to provide a gig, because that would mean that you've got a fiber operator there, maybe that's advertising a gig. And again, a cable operator should be able to do that. And then you've got fixed wireless and those kinds of things that could play in there. That speed window will be followed by another 7-year window. He mentions here, doesn't yet have to make the leap to 10 gig speed. So, you're not going to see many consumers getting 10 gigs right now. The speed window will be followed by another 7-year window in the range of 10 gigs to 100 gigs. That will then be followed by a speed window in the range of 100 gigs to 1 terabit per second. And they've got kind of a little chart here, I guess, that he had put together, where you've got today, and it's showing that you've got DOCSIS, and it's got 10G plus. So what you're talking about is kind of the DOCSIS 4.0 or the 10G initiative, which is supposedly going to get DOCSIS to a 10 gig symmetrical. That's what they were saying at one point, 10 gig symmetrical. I think right now they're realizing that's more like 6 gig, 6 gig symmetrical, maybe 10 gig on the downstream. But that's a reach. But there's other things they can do with spectrum to force that. In fact, a couple of years ago, he was saying he thought DOCSIS could go out to 25 gig and remain competitive. I think he's changed a little bit there and is realizing that fiber is probably going to be what cable operators do, rather than upgrade their plans even further to get up to 25 gig. But you see here PON going from 1 gig out to 1 terabit per second, and you've got your blocks here of time. So you got your 1 gig to 10 gig period. He's saying that's where we are today. Then you got your 10 gig to your 100 gig, that's coming next, and your 100 gig to a terabit per second right there. And you see down here the kind of the evolution back when I started, way back when. You've got dial-up, and then we had ISDN. That was where you would buy an ISDN line from the phone company, and you could get, if I recall, I think it was a 64K ISDN line or a 128K. You could get 128K, or I think you could get 2 bonded together and get up to 256K. Then you had DSL, starting out at 256K, getting up to a meg, and a little bit further on that, 10 meg, as I mentioned here, and a little higher on certain forms of DSL, but very short distances, kind of almost like wireless in that aspect. As you got further away from your DSLAM, your speeds were reduced. And then, of course, you got DOCSIS and PON there. And here's his 3 laws. By way of example, Chapman, who was about to leave Cisco after a 34-year career there, noted that 1200 baud dial-up modems were in use back in 1980. I remember those because I was in college at the time, and I was in a computer class, and that's what we were using to connect up and talk to each other. When I'd only used it basically to chat with other people at other schools. But I remember there was 1200 baud, and there was slower than that. Then there was 2400 baud, I think, after that. And then when I started in the internet business with this company, when we started out as a dial-up internet provider way back I started with the company in 95, we had, I think at that time, I believe it was, 28, I think it was 28.8 modems that we had at the time. I think we had just upgraded from 14.4 to 28.8, and then 28.8 went to 56K modems in the dial-up world, and that was really fast at that point for a dial-up connection. And there wasn't much on the internet. It didn't matter. I mean, you could download a web page. It wasn't really that bogged down with all the kind of stuff it is today. It says he said here, so he's looking at kind of he's looking at the progress over time. So he noted 1200 baud modems in use in 1980. 1 meg services emerged around 2000, and that would have been DSL. I remember, and here's another diversion on a story here. So I remember being back here when we were a dial-up provider and getting calls from people asking about DSL. They had heard about DSL, and they're like, "When are you guys going to get DSL?" So I had to find out what that was, and they were telling me, it's like 1.5 megabits per second, and I'm like, no way, that's like a T1, and that's not going to happen. But I found out, yeah, it is going to happen. We could not offer it because we were not a phone company, but that was something that would be happening. So you had DSL as fast as 1.5 meg at that time, certainly. Had probably some cable modems coming in, I think, at that point. And then It says here 1 meg 2000 and 1 gig speeds showing up in force by about 2000 or 2020, excuse me. And that's about right. You had some that had it before, and some certainly are still striving for that. So he said it fit, looking back at the history of his 20-year calculations. If you agree with those observations, if that's really what's happening and how technology is driving things, if we're at a gigabit in 2020, that suggests we'll be at a terabit in the access network by 2040. Whether anyone will actually need those kinds of speeds is a big question, and that is a big question because, again, we have 10 gig and even 20, 25 gig today that operators are starting to offer. They're offering that now in Chattanooga. Google Fiber is offering that. Comcast is offering 10 gig, I think, in some places, but who's going to buy that? It's certainly not a consumer unless they've got something really, really bandwidth intensive going on at their house. So he says here, Chapman and others who spoke here last week acknowledged that few, if any, residential customers need 1 gig speeds today, but competition demands it. And that's true. Again, somebody does not necessarily need a gig. It was the natural upgrade path for fiber, as fiber, 250, 300 meg, 500 meg, and then a gig. It's kind of the natural upgrade path. And for DOCSIS, DOCSIS trying to keep up. That's what cable providers are trying to do. But whether somebody actually needs a gig download speed is questionable, and certainly a gig upload. So gig symmetrical is a very nice supply-side driven marketing checkbox. It's not a consumer-driven demand. Consumers don't need 1 gig upload speeds. It would be very rare that somebody would. It says technology permits, competition drives it, and the market accepts it. And that's the path the industry is traveling as supply continues to outpace demand. You can't be a serious operator today if you don't have a gigs tier in your portfolio, Chapman said. I offer to you that people don't buy speed because they need it, but because they can. And I think that's true. Or because their provider gives it to them. So if you're like me, you may have signed up with a particular internet plan. If you've got fiber, for example, and just over time, the speeds that your plan was on increased, and your operator said, hey, congratulations, we're going to now be giving you a gig. Before you were getting maybe 500, then they raised you to 800, now they're up to a gig because they needed to do that to then bring in some lower tiers and some higher tiers, and they're trying to push the speeds up in order to, again, make a competitive splash, and that's what's driving a lot of that. So a lot of times people can get 300 or 500 megs, and that's what they buy. But in some cases, they want to get the fastest and the best. That's the way people are sometimes, and they'll get that gig service. DOCSIS will live on, and that's true. Chapman acknowledges that such lofty future speeds will be delivered on fiber to the prem, but stressed that history shows that DOCSIS networks likely will be here for years to come. And again, he's looking back at the past. He notes that DOCSIS effectively killed DSL in 2000 with megabit level speeds. And I think he's talking about multi-megabit there, because again, DSL was not really having a problem with megabit speeds, and later could do 10 meg down, but certainly cable exceeded that pretty quickly as DSL was making those kinds of advances. But he's saying here that cable did not overtake DSL on the worldwide basis until 2020. Now, cable has always been stronger here in the United States. DSL was really what most people were getting over in Europe and just outside the United States. So he's got the chart here showing, cable finally overtaking DSL. And really, it's not so much overtaking DSL, it's DSL declining very quickly. And then you've got fiber. Again, fiber being very expensive at the time was not the choice for most operators, including telephone companies. Telephone companies had already invested in copper infrastructure for DSL, and of course you had cable operators invested in their HFC or hybrid fiber coax infrastructure. So fiber, because of the cost and because of the fact that there was already infrastructure out there that operators had paid for, was slow. And you see it is crossing right here in, 2020 on the DSL line. And that's what we're seeing as we look at broadband numbers. What we've been seeing is companies like AT&T and Verizon are reporting, and other telephone-based companies that started as telephone operators, as they report their broadband numbers, they're basically holding even to maybe even losing a little bit, because they're replacing their existing infrastructure as quickly as they can in places from copper DSL service to fiber. But then also they're losing customers where they can't replace it fast enough to other operators. So they're seeing, as they're adding fiber subscribers in large numbers, they're also seeing large declines in their DSL services. So they're just now starting to get to the point where we're going to start to see, I think, gains from them as they have fewer and fewer DSL customers, and they can add more and more fiber customers and upgrade more and more customers that are on DSL to fiber. We cable, because again, this Cable Next Gen is a cable show, although cable is moving in the direction of fiber as it should. It says we cable killed DSL in 2000. It's still around 20 years later, and that's true. Now it's still around again because that's just infrastructure that's expensive to replace, and certainly it's those that are on DSL are hurting. And I hear from folks on the show here that are still on DSL that are still waiting to get some kind of upgrade to that service. So he says that suggests DOCSIS is going to be around 20 years from now. And that's absolutely true because, again, there's a tremendous amount of investment in DOCSIS infrastructure. And it is much less expensive to upgrade your DOCSIS cable plant than to rip that out and replace it with fiber. Because you're not just talking about your hard cable plant. You're talking about all the way to the customer premise and then having to change out the customer CPE at every location and go all the way to the home with the fiber versus changing out some network elements. And what's interesting now is something that's just recently being talked about is, of course we have DOCSIS 4.0 that's cable providers are looking at. They're doing some things to be able to up the speeds, but some of them are looking at going to another step in DOCSIS 3.1 that's being looked at, where they will have updated DOCSIS 3.1 modems that will not support everything in DOCSIS 4.0 as far as the really, really ultra high splits in DOCSIS 4.0, but they'll be able to take advantage of high splits and do some things that will allow cable operators to just change out the CPE at the customer location and not have to make some of the changes that they have to make in their hardline cable plant in order to do DOCSIS 4.0. So some cable operators are looking at doing that now, and that will allow them to get higher speeds on the download and higher speeds on the upload, but not necessarily as high as they would be able to do on DOCSIS 4.0. So they're looking at that as a step prior to 4.0 and maybe never 4.0. In other words, that's where they're kind of going to draw the line on DOCSIS and then start upgrading the cable plant to fiber. So that is another factor there. Thinking fiber first. Oh, it says here, that also suggests fiber and DOCSIS will coexist for a long time. I think that's true. DOCSIS providers are already deploying fiber in greenfield areas. And there's fiber, going to be fiber from the traditional fiber operators and DOCSIS from the traditional cable modem providers. Fiber is the long-term solution. Cable is more of a nearer-term solution, he explained, thinking fiber first. But the road ahead also means the cable industry needs to alter its thinking. The industry has reached an inflection point between the maturity of DOCSIS and the inevitability of fiber, and I think they all recognize fiber is inevitable. It's about coming up with a graceful, pragmatic solution to migrate, to transition from DOCSIS to fiber, and that migration is going to take 20 years, but we need a strategy that accommodates the two first. He said the industry would do well to shift from a DOCSIS first, fiber second mentality to one that is led by fiber. I think that little switch is the biggest problem and the biggest challenge we have. It's a cultural change. If you can do that, you'll be the operators that are building and delivering that terabit service in 2040. And certainly the terabit service is going to have to be over fiber. But what this does, again, this provides a long runway for cable operators to continue to provide good service to the customers that they have. There's lots of tools that will let them be more efficient in their operation on DOCSIS than they could have done in the past. That can help them maintain the plant better. We have something for that that you should check out if you go to our website and look up DOCSIS PNM. That's proactive network maintenance. If you're a cable operator, that's something that can help you reduce your maintenance costs and increase the reliability of your cable plant as you continue to compete. You're looking at fiber, but you need to maintain your DOCSIS cable plant. There's tools that can help you do that. In addition to being able to get these faster speeds, there's another thing that we have now called PMA. It's not PNM, but it's PMA, and that's profile management application, DOCSIS profile management application. So if you are upgraded or upgrading to DOCSIS 3.1, one of the challenges there is that as you go to those higher frequencies, they tend to be more susceptible to noise. And you want to, if you're going to upgrade your plant to DOCSIS 3.1, you want to put DOCSIS 3.1 modems out there and have them actually connect to your DOCSIS 3.1 channels, your OFDM and your OFDMA channels. And if you have any kind of noise on the channel, then what happens is all of the modems kind of go down to a lowest common denominator on your profiles, so that they don't get the fastest speeds. But what DOCSIS PMA does is it automatically selects the best profiles for all of your modems, so that any noise on the plant only impacts those modems that are actually going to be impacted by that noise, so that the others don't need to come down. So that's something you should check out as well. So again, check out our website, look for DOCSIS PNM and DOCSIS PMA. Those two items can help you if you're a cable operator. So again, it looks like cable, as I've been saying for years, is going to be here to stay as as a competitive solution, because cable operators are able to increase their download speeds and their upload speeds now as they do mid splits and high splits. And again, these new DOCSIS 3.1 modems will help them do that even less more inexpensively, as they are able to maybe just upgrade the CPE and not necessarily all of their amplifiers and other equipment out in the plant that they would need for DOCSIS 4.0. So there's still a lot of life there in DOCSIS, but fiber is the future. There's no doubt about that. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. If you are not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified when I'm live. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. Now we'll see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care. Bye-bye.